Good evening. So tonight I'd actually like to continue Fatima's story to tell you a story about Sierra Leone. But it's probably not the type of story you're used to hearing or reading about. This is not a story about Ebola. This is not a story about blood diamonds. It's not a story about civil war or corruption either. It's actually a story about an incredible country that is often overlooked but full of potential, and about a company that is contributing to changing the narrative about Sierra Leone, all the while bringing affordable and quality energy for the first time to hundreds of thousands of people. But first, let me start at the beginning. About 4 years ago, I found myself actually not far from here. I was up in Harlem, enrolled in a program at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. At this point, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life. Up until then, I had kind of done everything right, or so I thought. I had studied engineering in Paris and London. I had a successful career in mergers and acquisitions and consulting. I was working on billion-dollar deals and working crazy hours. But eventually, I realized that not only was I working with people whose values were fundamentally different from mine, but also that I really loved working, but I was putting all of my energy and passion into basically making rich people richer. That didn't feel quite right. So I had gone back to school with a very open mind and almost a sense of duty. I was genuinely trying to understand what were the most pressing issues around the world, who was doing what about them, and how I could help. It became clear pretty quickly that because of my background, creating or joining a social enterprise was probably the best way forward. But it actually took a meeting with two schoolmates who had started working on what at the time seemed like a crazy idea to really get me going. So I think if you had tried to handpick within our cohort 3 students with a more diverse background, it would have been a very difficult job. We were each born and raised on a different continent. We had studied completely different topics and worked in different fields. Eric Silverman is a Brooklyn native, liberal arts major who had spent 4 years working and living in Sierra Leone, including 2 with the Peace Corps, being a teacher in a remote community. And Habisang Mosia, she was born to a Ghanaian mom and a South African dad. She had studied accounting, and having witnessed firsthand power blackouts growing up, she was determined to make a difference in the energy sector in Africa, conscious that doing so would require her to break the many barriers that stand between Black women and positions of power in this sector. And then there was me, recovering M&A consultant and engineer from France. But for all of our differences, we had one thing in common. We all found it unbelievable, unfair, and to be honest, almost difficult to live in a world where so much depends on energy. About 600 million people didn't have access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa. Actually, back in 2015, there was a number of innovative companies that were starting to make a difference and bring real solutions to the market. And actually, at that time, Acumen was already playing a catalytic role in the sector, having supported companies like D-Light for several years. But almost all of the effort was going into a handful of countries in East Africa. So at a time when some of those East African companies were starting to try and replicate their model in some of the larger West African countries like Nigeria or Ghana, we decided to explore whether their model could also work in smaller countries like Sierra Leone, where we had a natural connection. So here we are during winter break from school in December 2015, traveling to Sierra Leone to survey about 2,000 households, something we didn't exactly disclose to Colombia. I hope there's no one from administration, since the country had back then not officially been declared Ebola-free. After speaking to thousands of people, we learned very quickly why the solar energy revolution was not reaching countries like Sierra Leone. Existing solutions hinged on mobile money, the payment revolution that allowed customers to make payments directly and remotely through their cell phones in East Africa. In Sierra Leone, mobile money barely existed. People didn't even know about it, and mobile network didn't even cover the whole country. In addition, while we found that households were spending 15 to 20% of their income on energy, their average income was extremely low, with about 60% of Sierra Leone's 7 million people living on less than $1.25 per day. The country remained amongst the world's poorest nation, ranking 180 out of 187 on the Human Development Index. That meant that households just had a lot less money to spend on energy than in, say, Kenya or Tanzania. And finally, there was very little awareness about solar. Very few households had ever heard or used a solar product before. And those who had didn't necessarily have a good experience. So upon returning from our trip, we knew that if we were going to actually solve the problem of clean and affordable energy in countries like Sierra Leone, we needed to build a solution that was really centered around the needs and realities of the customers we wanted to serve. And I think that looking back at one of the elements that allowed us to do things differently and challenge the narrative that it was going to be impossible or not viable to start a solar company in Sierra Leone, one of them was that we did not come in the country with a predefined model. We saw too many innovations being driven by technology, not the needs of the poor. We saw too many investors waiting to invest in the perfect solution. We saw too many development experts or social businesses citing that technology will eventually leapfrog people out of poverty if the poor can just, wait long enough or finally start using those revolutionary technology. But what most people didn't understand is that in countries like Sierra Leone, it might take 5 or 10 or 20 years for the electricity grid to be extended, for enough mini-grids to be built, or even for mobile money to pick up the way it had in Kenya. So what about the millions of people that didn't have access to energy and opportunity in the meantime? If investors, microfinance institutions, even mission-driven solar companies were not going into this market, who would? I think we knew that there was no good answer to that question. And so the three of us, having freshly graduated from school, we just packed our bags and moved to Sierra Leone. Easy Solar was born. So Easy Solar is a company that uses a network of community-based agents to sell a large range of solar products to people living without electricity and allowing them to pay over time. Those agents, 2 of which you can see up there, also collect payments over time from customers and provide a first level of after-sales service in their communities. Well, in a country without mobile money, we learned to deal with cash. And actually, over the last 2.5 years, we have developed one of the biggest and most effective formal cash collection networks in Sierra Leone. In a country with very low available income, we decided to include small entry-level solar products into our product mix. More than 50% of our customers actually start with one of those products, which is extremely affordable. People can buy it for $20 that they will actually pay over 4 months. And in paying those $20, they also demonstrate a first level of creditworthiness, which then allows us to give them better and more affordable credit terms to finance larger products like solar home systems. And in a country with very little awareness about solar and financing, we leverage community dynamics to talk about the benefits of quality solar and create trust around the brand and our products. And as a result, I'm happy to say, it's actually quite late in Sierra Leone right now, that in just about 2.5 years, and in one of the smallest and poorest countries in Africa, tonight more than 200,000 people actually used one of the products distributed or financed by Easy Solar to light up their house. Thank you. To light up their house, charge their phones, or turn on their TV. And in that time, we're so extremely proud to have created more than 350 sustainable jobs in the country. But while we're extremely proud of what we've accomplished, myself and my co-founders have learned some tough and sometimes even painful lessons along the way. The most important lesson we've probably learned is that if you're going to shift the power paradigm, you have to be able to see the new paradigm first. When we started in Sierra Leone, we were told and we quickly realized that it was going to be extremely difficult to hire talent. Initially, we had set out to do what we knew. We were hiring people with the right CVs, those with business experience, good degrees, background in similar industries. We were focusing on aptitude, but very quickly the strategy fell apart. Senior team members left for jobs that were paying more, and most importantly, we had a number of fraud cases as well. And at the very same time, we had employees like Fatima, which you saw in the video, who had none of the right education or experience, but who were bringing all of the right empathy and commitment and reliability that we needed. And this helped us look at hiring completely differently. We actually went back to the drawing board and started with a completely different approach. We realized that in an environment with so much uncertainty, trust, dedication, effort were not coming from having worked for a reputable organization or having studied and having the right education. We realized that CVs can be forged, or a candidate's passion to solve an issue couldn't. We realized that certificates could be faked, but those same candidates, their empathy that they were demonstrating for potential customers could not. And so we completely shifted from recruited on aptitude to recruiting on attitude. And I think that as a result, today I'm happy to say that Easy Solar is an organization where we embrace diversity. Our workforce comes from various socioeconomic and educational backgrounds. And on the gender side, we have actually 50% now of our leadership team, and 44% of our staff are women. Thank you. And based on the surveys that we run in our company, we know that women feel like Easy Solar is an environment where they can thrive. And I wanted to share with you an example. It's one of the things that keep me going of the text message that Fatima actually sent to me and all the employees in Easy Solar on March 1st, 2019, very recently, coming back from her 4-month maternity leave. And she said, ask yourself if what you're doing today is getting you closer to where you want to be, back to work at the Lunzer shop. Creating such an environment, and in doing so challenging traditional power structures, was about a lot more than processes and policy. It was about having shared values around change. It takes drive, character, and a strong and core belief within the founding team that diversity, whether it's from a gender, race, ethnicity, or religion perspective, is beneficial to an organization. That even though it is harder to work with people who are different from you. And I mean, you've seen our founding team, we're very different, and it's not easy every day. But it is that very tension, that difference of opinion and perspective that I think allows us continuously to keep making the right decisions. Along the journey of co-founding Easy Solar, I've heard more often than not that what we wanted to do was impossible or not viable, that it was impossible to do business in a country as small or as poor as Sierra Leone, that it was impossible to operate with physical cash, that it was impossible to be viable by selling solar lanterns, that it was impossible to run a network of community-based agents, that it was impossible to hire and develop a gender-balanced workforce of people who simply believed in our mission, and that it was going to be impossible to convince investors that we were a bet worth taking. Not only has Easy Solar been proving those paradigms false, but in the process, we're impacting the lives of hundreds of thousands of low-income people and working to create and change opportunity in a country that many others had overlooked. I think when you're facing issues that are as big as poverty, lack of access to energy, lack of access to education or to healthcare, it's often tempting to think about tomorrow and to think about the solutions that the future and new technologies, you may be thinking about mobile money or Bitcoin or one of those, or AI, one of those solutions that new technologies will bring. But I think what Easy Solar, and in partnership with Acumen, has recognized is that we actually need solutions that work today, no matter how impossible they may seem. And I think that by developing and investing in those solutions, we will all be in a better position to deliver the promises of tomorrow, not just for some, but for everyone. Thank you.